Alrighty. I mean, apparently we're doing Vartan is overpowered now. Let's, or overrated now. Let's go ahead and do this thing. So, I don't know why there have been more comments coming in lately talking about the Vartan being overpowered of all things. I mean, it's a perfectly fine unit. There's nothing particularly insane about it. It's nothing that it can do that nobody else can't, but all right, whatever. I guess we're doing this now. So let's talk about the Vartan and its whole deal. So the Vartan is essentially a high mobility flying unit available exclusively to Hawk type units, and will have a pretty decently wide access to a different amount of different weapons, starting with fists, daggers, axes, hammers, cudgels, bows, and crossbows, being limited in some very oddly specific places with those. But as far as their skills are concerned, it's a very, very sparse list. We've got the dang near completely worthless Oponga Winds, which essentially gives you the ability to go inflict something with air reverse, something your spells could do, or potentially give somebody stagger, whose primary purpose is to overcome things like dodge, which the AI does not use. So either way, not exactly particularly useful there. We've got Elkolos Winds, which is pretty actually useful, which does give you True Strike, which, again, it's weird that they have two skills that do basically the same thing here in terms of improving your accuracy by 20%. So in the case that you're fighting in a storm and fighting in the water, you can improve your accuracy so that you never miss with your melee attacks, whereas this one would further cause the other guy to not dodge melee attacks as often. Alrighty then. Anyway, there's no situation that will be stacking both of those. Don't bother. So, okay. From there, we've got Resist, Charm, and Petrify, as you do, and Fey Pact for talking to fairies. Currently, he's got Dragon Slayer on here because over here we've got the Dragon Slayer set. Now, the cool thing about this is that you can Ogre Blade stuff into this loadout, and that's actually kind of its main value. It's kind of the discount Angel Knight in a way, wherein if you Ogre Blade stuff into this class, it is potentially nutty. Like, let's say you give them Tremendous Shot off of something like an Archer. Actually, come to think of it, no, you can't even transfer that over to them because they would need two-hander access. So you would be able to potentially give them Lament of the Dead. You could give them some double attacks. There's a few different things you can transfer over to them, maybe some Lich skills, some Angel skills. It's a very oddly specific list, but almost none of it synergizes particularly well with what they do best, which is effectively staying on the peripheries of a fight. So, the Vartan's whole deal is that they're one of very few Tribrids that's in the roster, being somebody that's got access to all tiers of missile spells, and basically nothing else, as well as a good number of fast-hitting melee attacks, as well as ranged attacks. Now, the way that I personally consider this to be most useful is as a sort of taking your mid-game Dragoon type of build and transferring it into the post-game. By which I mean, typically when you're in the post-game, having access to something like a Dragon's Wound to get rid of a Dragon skill is potentially more useful than the Dragon Slayer skill itself on a Dragoon. So like Bane plus Scale, Bane plus Wound is typically going to give you far better results than, for example, just trying to power through with Slayer. And so this means that the Slayer set is just kind of sitting out here with a lot of units having access to it, meaning that, for example, something like a Vartan with high movement has the perfect opportunity to swoop in with something like Dragon Slayer and Instill to go for that big poison stab or what have you. It's great in their hands. Same thing as with the Angel Knight. It's really useful in their hands. But there's nothing particularly kind of overpowered about this class that they can't do as anybody else. Like, you could do this exact same thing with something like the Warrior, and then you have access to Mighty Strike instead of Slayer. Let's say replace that other skill with a double, maybe replace it with a Vigorous attack so that you're guaranteeing your poison slashes all the time. Or let's say replace them with an Archer running more or less the same loadout. I forget, do Archers get access to the Dragon Fang? No, they don't. But you could potentially run Pistol, well, actually, no, if they're a Flyer, then that probably wouldn't be what they would go for. Let's go take a look at the Flyer classes real quick. So you can run something relatively similar on something like the Fencer, potentially just going for one of the status swords in that case, and you have your usual overpowered Fencer type of stuff. Like, there's really nothing in particular that the Vartan does that nobody else can potentially also do equally or better. It's really just the Tribrid thing. But the weird thing about the Tribrid thing is that for how often they use their missile spells, oftentimes you'd be better off just using the missile spells that are available on many late-game weapons. So for example, they typically won't be constantly firing these things off, they typically will just fire them a few times and that's it. And so for example, your dead shots, your aqua blasts, things like that, these are outside of the tier 4 variants, these are going to be available on endgame weapons, and some of them are stuff that you would be able to get multiple copies of. So, in essence, you might be losing out on other opportunities by not going for those instead. And those even have a wider access to different types of spells like AoEs and what have you. Now, again, there's nothing particularly overpowered about this class. I'm not sure where that's suddenly coming from, but you know, they're good. It's good to have, for example, this kind of finisher access. Longbow finishers on a one-handed longbow combined with something like Slayer. That's fantastic. That is just damn good value right there. Giving you a nice quick attack with a Dragon Slayer bonus. Potentially apply the Flaming Blast with the Dragon Slayer. I'm not sure if those two pair together to guarantee the charm, but that would be pretty darn neato if it did. But yeah, you've got nice cheap finishers with a combination of Dragon Slayer, and the Vartan's, again, main thing is being able to stay in the peripheries of the fight. With high movement and flight guaranteed, they're constantly able to get cards that others simply will not have access to conveniently. This is why their Tribrid setup works in the first place, because they just simply pick up whatever cards they get and just make it work, you know? So it's a very sparse loadout, it's a very kind of oddly specific thing here, and again, they're a bit of a scavenger. As far as I'm concerned, they're a straight-up scavenger of a class. I personally like running them like this, but there's nothing saying you can't run them, you know, something like fists, maybe go for some talons on them, maybe go for some different hammer variants or what have you, maybe go for something with a bit more health, I don't know. But again, I'm not really sure where the notion is that this one comes off as overpowered. Like, compared with other classes, compared with their other peers, it's weird what you would even compare them to. Like, I guess you could technically combine them with something like, or compare them with something like the Juggernaut, maybe, because the Juggernaut similarly gets really high movement. In the Juggernaut's case, though, they're also going to have the ability to automatically stop units nearby them. They're going to have full access to heavy armor. So either way, you've got a lot of options that other ones would be getting as well. There's nothing wrong with using the Vartan, and frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I don't even think they should have that reputation of being overpowered. Where is that coming from again? Like, I thought we were all past this. Anyway, so yeah, that's about that. Vartan, it's exactly okay. It's fun to play around with. There's nothing too nutty about it. Where on earth did I leave my Vartan? Here you are. They are exactly okay. And yeah, if you're looking for something to get more value out of the Vartan, look for anything that's got potentially one big heavy hit. Something like Ennokos, just basically being a free and still kind of skill here. It's very useful. The kind of one nice thing that I should mention about Ennokos here is if you are, let's say, fighting in bad terrain, you are, let's say, running into positions where there's a boss and they're hiding in the swamp, they do have one unique advantage in the form of the fact that Ennokos will actually improve their accuracy while they're in bad terrain. So basically, they're unaffected by bad terrain tiles, for all intents and purposes, while using this, because True Strike will allow those melee finishers to hit, 20% more often. In the odd case that you are affected by weather, that you are affected by terrain or whatever else, maybe you're hit by a false strike out of somewhere. So they do have that going for them. They're mildly more consistent under extreme scenarios. So yeah. Anyway, that's that. I don't know why anyone would ever consider this overpowered, but you know what? Y'all keep them comments coming. What else is overpowered? Because the next one is going to be the One Vision Cleric.